Councillor Belford.
I have a question that maybe George will speak to in his comments. Your presentations are always do an excellent job of establishing that you're busy. But isn't the test of this at the end of the day whether your efforts are increasing Hawke's Bay's market share in terms of visitors versus what other regions are doing, or a bigger piece of the pie overall? And none of the numbers that you present here actually provide any indication of that one way or the other. I mean, it's just, it's a lot of description of what you're doing and a lot of numbers in terms of how many people are coming here and whether that's sort of up or down as a regional number. But it's absent a context of so are we, after doing all of this, are we in fact increasing our market share, which is what the name of the game is, as I understand it.
Do you want to go?
Well, it's in the report.
Yeah, I mean, I think the key thing in there, though, Councillor Belford, is around the spend figures. So when we look at that spend data, that would tell us that Hawke's Bay has actually performed exceptionally well over our period, and a lot of the work we do has helped to drive that. So
it's indicating that maybe our spend is going up, but is our spend going up at a rate that actually puts us lower than the rate of growth of other regions, greater than the growth rate of other regions? We are, presumably, we are in a contest here for market share. That's what it's all about. And are we increasing it or not?
If you look at the commercial accommodation data, you'll find that we're probably holding our own against the rest of the country, but we're not increasing. We were behind. And you know, one of the issues we've raised, and one of the issues we're raising around the funding, is if we truly want to compete with the other regions and actually take market share off them, we have to be prepared to spend at least what they do, and we don't. So we are not at the situation where we can grow market share beyond where we're at the moment if we continue to invest the same amount of money. The argument that we've put forward is that if we truly want to grow tourism in this region by about 5% compound a year over the next 10 years, we'll have to invest more money. And the reason for that is that our competitor regions are doing just that. So far, as I said, we're keeping pace with the growth in tourism broadly in the country. Some regions are ahead, some regions are behind, depending on the time of the year. Some regions are doing incredibly well, like Queenstown, Auckland, but in the regional areas, we're there or thereabouts. But we're not breaking into a high growth phase because simply we don't have the money to compete with them.
I would simply ask that there be some comparative data presented in these reports.
It is presented.
Oh, it has been in there in the past, and we've taken it out because we don't get the comparative data is the spend figure. So, and I think relying solely on the commercial accommodation monitor is not going to give you an accurate read on the total picture. So, but I can look at the share data for the overall spend, which would be the most accurate of all that data. But not within the private household monitor, which we monitor, not every region runs that, so we can't obviously compare ourselves to everyone.
Thank you. Councillor Bevan.
Yes. Thanks, Chair. I had a question around this commercial accommodation monitor. Firstly, can you define what you mean by commercial accommodation?
It only classifies hotels, motels, backpackers and holiday parks.
Okay. So it's paid accommodation?
Not all paid accommodation, because it excludes holiday homes, Black Barn, Miller Road, those types of properties. B&Bs are not included in that survey.
Okay. So if you look at the numbers we've got here, in particular for January and February, there's 7 years of monitoring there, and this year shows an increase, and I think it says of 5.6% on last year, but it's still the third lowest for both January and February in the last 7 years. So until this year, there was a significant decline in those numbers. Can you tell me why that's happened? and whether this turnaround that's happened between last year and this year is some sort of a temporary blip, or whether
Are you just referring to commercial or the total?
I'm looking at the graph that's on page 66 on the bottom half of the page, and I'm looking at the bars for January and February, and the bar for this year is the third lowest in that 7-year period for both January and February.
I might have to come and look at your graph because mine doesn't look like that.
Really?
Can I? Sorry, I don't have your papers.
Oh, okay.
Oh, that's the commercial. This one?
Yeah.
Sorry, my glasses on. That's just the commercial data. Is that right? Is that the one?
Yeah, commercial accommodation data, yeah.
Yeah, what we've seen mostly in the last 4 or 5 years is a massive increase in people staying in private homes. And so therefore the commercial sector has been pretty slow. We've also obviously been in a recession. But what we've also noticed in Hawke's Bay is the proliferation of holiday home accommodation and the preference for visitors to rent a holiday home via Book a Batch or holidayhomes.co.nz. So that's taken away from a lot of the commercial accommodation that we've traditionally seen. So, for example, a Black Barn now, with 18 properties, has capacity for 30,000 people a year. They're running at an exceptionally high occupancy level, but they're not captured in any of our data. And that's why we put this out there, because it's the national stat, but it doesn't reflect the true makeup of accommodation in Hawke's Bay.
Okay, so it would be fair to describe this as misleading then, from what you just said.
It is, but it is all we have, and it is rated by Stats New Zealand as the source that we should use. That's why the spend data picks up everyone, irrespective of where they sleep, and will capture people spending money in Havelock, at Black Barn, etc. But
so there's no way that you can improve this data so it more accurately reflects paid accommodation?
They won't. It's an issue that's been going on for a very long time. This data set's just gone through a massive review. We couldn't get holiday home data included, and we couldn't get bed and breakfast data included either. So they've stuck with those 4 categories.
So, I mean, I'd rather not see this than being misled by it.
Well, I'm happy not to include it. It's one of the stats that we have as an indicator of where things are at.
Okay, so just out of interest, the next page has got private household monitor, which is private accommodation. How do you get those stats? Where do they come from?
It's a household survey that's run monthly, and they ring 500 households in Hawke's Bay and ask them a series of questions. So it's run through a research company, APR.
I think it's fair to say the commercial accommodation monitor was the standard for the industry for decades, but the problem's been with the birth of the internet. People have a direct booking opportunity now, and they're not using commercial accommodation in quite the same way. This is a survey done of selected properties only who are required by stats to give submissions. They don't all submit. And
so why hasn't somebody gone to, is it Statistics New Zealand that does it? So why hasn't somebody gone to them and said, look,
the industry has gone time and time again, because I can assure you most RTOs suffer the same experience that we do, that the data you use, it's the only data you're given, is really not a good representation.
It's not a good base for our judging on the effectiveness of what we're doing at all.
The better thing is spend, and because that's really what we're trying to achieve. Just on that, perhaps interesting to know that we're actually part of it. We're engaging in a test case with Spark on cell phone tracking to try and we're the only region to do this at the moment. We've been selected to take part in it, and we think this might actually answer the question completely, which will give us accurate data on who's coming to our region from where and for how long they're staying.
And it's an actual exact record.
It'll be exact record, and it'll be using the cell phone network to actually track visitor, not only where they come from, but where they go to once they're here. And it could totally revolutionise our understanding of the visitor. It's pretty exciting. So we're going to be the first region to trial that, and we have engaged at it now. And I suspect within the next 3 to 6 months we'll probably be able to provide you with some quite interesting information.
One more question, Councillor Barker, but you have more to present, is that correct?
Yeah.
One more slide.
Okay, so Councillor Barker, you happy to hear? Oh, well, perhaps if you finish your preso and then we can open it up some more.
I just refer back to those major projects. We've discussed these at length with the other councils, and we've certainly got agreement from everybody that they're important. But just again, going on to the visitor websites for the region over the last week or so, it is an absolute nightmare. And we have to, as a region, understand that we need to present ourselves to the visitor so we can be accessed in the easiest possible way. So we're putting a lot of effort into that, but it is an urgent need with the importance of websites and future visitor patterns and activities. We've got to get this one right, so we're going on that. What I'd just like to cover now is perhaps the area that is the invisible part of a regional tourism organisation. A lot of the work that we do is completely unseen, and if we were not to do it, people would take some time before they realised that the problem was developing. And that's in the area of keeping awareness up in media, both international and domestic, and keeping our profile up with the travel trade. Now, if we don't do work in those two areas, essentially a vacuum is created which other regions rush in to cover. And so bringing people from travel companies internationally and domestically to this region is a very, very important part of making sure that when they put their brochures together, when they put their products together, Hawke's Bay features strongly in that so that customers can actually find it. When people look at New Zealand that's being presented in an international magazine, if we haven't done our work properly, then Hawke's Bay doesn't get any exposure within that, and so the other regions crowd us out. And we've asked the team just over the last little while to look at the last 12 months of activity of Hawke's Bay Regional Tourism to see, well, what did we do? How much money did the local tourism industry contribute to this event? And what was the impact of that in terms of the exposure to this region in media generally? And how would we rate that? So we looked at the degree of pages that we displayed representing our region, and how much would it have cost if we went out and actually paid for all that. And I think I'd just like to say that without the work that the team do on this thing day in, day out, hosting hundreds and hundreds of journalists and trade, Hawke's Bay would not be represented anywhere. And people have often said, well, you know, what do you get for your funding? This is the profile that the region gets. And it not only benefits tourism, it benefits all of the industry within the region. So, Annie, if you could just put the slide up. So, over the last 12 months, 60 media, mainly international, have been hosted in the region. In other words, they've been brought in here, it's been explained to them, they've been accommodated, they've been shown what we have to offer. And plus 130 travel trade from right around the world. The local industry support to host that in the travel trade is around about $230,000. So they give us free accommodation, they free meals, you name it. So they do that by way of profiling the region. They profile their own business at the same time, but that's what it costs. The media reach over the course of that has been estimated at about 100 million, and that's looking at the magazines that we're profiled in and what their readership is. So that's the exposure that we've gained. The estimated advertising value, if we were to pay for that coverage, is around about $10 million in the last year. Hosted trade ensure that Hawke's Bay has a presence in all travel sellers' brochures websites, which results in increased bookings for the region. Now, the importance of both of these things is this is not for this year, it's generally for next year and the year after. And what was happening when we reformed Hawke's Bay Tourism is that none of this was happening. So we went through a vacuum period where really the region had lost its profile. It was not being represented effectively alongside other regions. And because this is a long-term build which all regional tourism organisations need to do. What I'd like to highlight is that I think when it comes to Hawke's Bay, we have in the people that work for Hawke's Bay Tourism experts at this. Annie's worked in this area for many, many years, and I've seen what's happened having been involved in the national environment, that regions that are very, very active, accommodating, helpful, and onto it generally get a better deal out of this, and we're getting a good deal out of this at the moment. So this is what's not seen. This just goes on day in and day out throughout the region. And if the team we have weren't to do this, no one else would pick it up. There isn't anyone else in the region that will actually say, we'll take the initiative on this. So it's quite important. I think it's something to bear in mind that as we talk about funding of a regional tourism organisation now and into the future, this needs to keep going and we need to get stronger. But that's the thing that builds the future for the region and builds interest in the region over the next decade. Thank you.
Councillor Dick.
Yeah, morning, thanks. In relation to this last matter, traditionally the Art Deco Trust had played a role quite strongly for many, many years in hosting, and I presume that you work together
Oh yeah,
on
definitely,
these things?
yes.
Yep.
Other
Well,
questions?
what you've done is internationalise that, though, I think.
Yeah, the internationalising of that with Art Deco, with the major event funding, but Art Deco Trust would be, most of those media would have had exposure and trade through the Art Deco Trust, yeah.
That's
Just,
it, Chairman.
I've got a question. The event stuff that you've picked up the cudgel on, done the regional view of some of the events, there may be some modest income in it, probably not a lot compared to the resource you have to throw at it. How do you transition, well, question, are you transitioning out of some of these events and hopefully, you know, private parties will pick it up?
It's a, yeah, when it comes to events, we've essentially created that as a way of increasing profile domestically for the region. We don't see ourselves as, in the long term, being an event company. We would like, for example, to secure a major funder for Fork so that we could actually start to run that as a separate entity. It has the potential to make money. It's getting better each year, and it's not going to happen instantly, but our goal is within 5 years by the 5th year that we've got Fork to a position where it's sort of becoming self-funding and potentially funding its own management, which is, then it's a product that can sit on its own. It's a little the same with the Big Easy. And that's why I say these are the obvious things we do, but the real work that we have to do is outside of the region. But that's our plan.
Okay, thank you. Right, other questions? I've got you on the queue.
My
Never,
question,
Councillor, never.
The question I have for you is about your engagement with Air New Zealand. Air New Zealand is a key part of our tourism industry, and I've had the fortune and misfortune to be travelling a lot on Air New Zealand in the last 4 months, and I found it almost impossible to get on a number of flights. I've been travelling with people who have been shipped from all over the country to Auckland to get into Hawke's Bay, or have been shipped out of other places to Wellington to get into Hawke's Bay. Most of the flights are full, you cannot get on them. And at one stage it was impossible to get back here for 2 days because the flights were fully booked. Now, I would have thought this is a stranglehold on our tourism potential. It's inconvenient for everybody else. But you know, are you aware of the problem? Do you engage with Air New Zealand? Because if you can't book on their flights, you can't travel here. Not everybody's going to drive.
I mean, we have great engagement with Air New Zealand, so we've got a close relationship with them. I mean, they have increased capacity on the Hawke's Bay route, but clearly not enough. So, I mean, that's the first I've heard of the bottlenecks, but I'll raise it with Air New Zealand directly and find out what. It may be on peak services, but that does seem a little extreme that they're completely sold out because they have upgauged and got bigger aircraft and so on. But I can do some digging for you and speak to the regional affairs manager who runs that.
If you wish, I can get you a list of names of people who have experienced exactly the same as me. It seems to me, on one hand, it's no inconvenience for Air New Zealand. If I have to fly to Auckland to then fly back to Hawke's Bay, they get 2 airfares for the price of 1, and 1 is dear enough as it is. And other people are having to do 3 legs to get here, whereas they should be able to get a single leg. This, of course, suits Air New Zealand, 3 sectors, effectively one flight. I don't think they really have an interest in it, and every time a plane is full, they're maximising their loads, they're maximising their margins. And as you well know, the last half a dozen seats on a plane are always the most expensive to buy, so bingo, they've got 3 hits out of it. So I don't particularly see an incentive for Air New Zealand to change, but I would say it's strangling its profits.
I will follow up for you.
Thank you. Other questions? Okay, well, just before I take that, you have a question, Councillor Bevan?
Yeah, just one question. I notice in your branding, which is on page 69, the entities within Hawke's Bay that are using it. Sadly, I don't see Napier or Hastings councils listed there amongst the users of this brand. And a big concern for me is getting the buy-in, cooperation and co-funding of those 2 entities. And I know we've talked about this before. Would you care to comment and give us a bit of a heads up on where that's at?
Yes. From a brand point of view, what we've talked to both councils about that. They obviously have long history with associated brands, so there's a bit of issue around that. Napier has been using the version of our brand, for example, on McLean Park with the Cricket World Cup, etc. So there is an adoption of that. Napier City Business Inc. have picked up that as well, so Napier's probably using it a little bit more. Hastings obviously does have the Heart of Hawke's Bay, so they do have a history with that, and that's for their council, I guess, to decide whether they're happy to be part of this process. The creative work we've shown them with Hastings creatively reflected like ours, they like. So I think it's something that is obviously small steps. They've got, that's a question that they really have to answer in that space. But ideally, we'd like everyone using the Hawke's Bay brand and whichever suits their various district or city. Central Hawke's Bay's picked it up beautifully. Wairau hasn't yet, but so it's small steps, but we're getting there slowly.
Okay. Happy to move. We have someone to second that motion. Councillor Pipe, thank you. Wish to speak, Councillor?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Handace and Mr. Hipton, for a very encouraging report. Good news stories always worth celebrating, and it has been a good quarter. So I think for us the question is how effective is it? And I take heart in your description of the legends of cricket going out worldwide. I think that sort of coverage, and I think that last slide you put up there now is a very telling one of what leverage we can get out of it. Matters have been risen around whether we can actually take a greater share of the market from some of the traditionally successful tourism areas. And this is a matter that's been risen, you've brought up with us before, that it's very hard to compete against the enormous spending of some of our partners, and you have actually laid that spending out in front of us. And we are small fry in spending when it comes to a comparison of that. So what is good is to see that you continue to strengthen our market within what you've got, and it seems to me that's being done quite effectively. I would like to comment on the commercial monitor. It is something that a lot of people look to. We know that we have had a lot of submissions on this matter as regard to where that goes. So it is actually still quite an important monitor, and Mr. Hickton, I think, touched on the matter that the internet made quite a change in giving people more access to alternative accommodation, but it's made another significant change to that commercial booking, and that is the demise of the commercial traveller. And that was the backbone of the commercial travel, and we've actually discussed this in council again, that the shift away from what was the backbone of our motels and that regular travelling salesmen who with regular bookings, that now it's all done by internet. So the commercial accommodation model, as we've discussed a lot in this council, they actually do have to move to meet the demands of the modern circumstances, which are very different from what they were 10 years ago. So I think that I take a lot of encouragement that we're continuing to increase our profile and that is in continuing to make this an attractive place to come, and that the amount to spend, we're up to 550 million. It's a pity we haven't got enough moo cows attracting people as Waikato seems to have, but never discovered why so many people go to Waikato, but certainly it is a very important part of our economy, and it's good to see that it is being supported and that we're continuing to grow it. So thank you for your report, and I take great encouragement from it.
Thank you. Councillor Pipe.
Yeah, thanks, George. Thanks, Annie. The visitor expenditure figures are very interesting there, and I don't think we're ever going to take over Christchurch, Queenstown, Wellington or Auckland. Waikato we could have a go at, I guess, which would be really quite nice. But I think also what's really good, and I'm glad you talked about it, and that's the this new project that with Spark. I think one of the things that we've already talked about in the past is getting accuracy in our figures, and it's always been questioned, you know, is this the visitor spend? How do you work that out? How do you work out the visitor numbers? And I think the more we've got, better tools we've got to actually accurately gauge that, the better information we can have when it comes to funding. The other thing is that I just wanted to touch on, and thank you, George, for raising that about the leveraging our funding. I've heard comments sometimes about, you know, why doesn't the industry should be putting more money into it and contributing more rather than just necessarily the general ratepayers. And this slide that you've shown there actually shows that the industry is putting in a lot of money and a lot of time and effort as well. And when you look at the media reach of 100 million for those wonderful articles that we get in overseas magazines, and I've seen some of those, it's quite fantastic. So it all helps. Well done. Carry on the good work.
Thank you. Councillor Belford.
Maybe a question and a comment, but I've been assuming that you all are going to come before us in the LTP process with a submission requesting funding of some amount, right? And so I would just ask that when you do so, you're able to put that in some context as to overall spend in the new spirit of cooperation amongst all councils here. It would seem rather urgent to us that we see what your request, how your request sits in a bigger picture of spending against these kinds of objectives. And it's not heartening when we still have a dozen or so websites floating around out there when as you point out, that is the engine of visitor search these days. As I say, hopefully we don't get a request from you that's sort of in a vacuum as to how does it sit in the regional spend on these objectives.
Thank you, Councillor. Other speakers wish to sum up? Put the motion, and all those in favour please say aye. Contrary, no. Carried. Thank you very much. George and Annie.